Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be presented by Syertse, and her webinar will be about creating anime girls in Clip Studio Paint. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. There will be a Q&A session during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Please use the question panels to send comments, if doubts or suggestions, etc. We have a chat window, but that's only used for us to share information. Um, we'll, due to time constraint, unfortunately, not all the questions will be answered, but we'll try to do our best to ask all of your questions. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared on social media and also sent to all of the registrants and attendees. The panelists are Mario Quiñones and Syertse or Sasha. Also, if this is your first time connecting with us and you don't know or you haven't used Clip Studio Paint, Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/n and graphically.com. And also, we invite you to share Instagram stories, sharing your love. And if you're enjoying the webinar through your Instagram stories, tagging us as hashtag webinar at Syertse, at Graphicsly, at Wacom, and at Clip Studio Official. Syertse is a full-time freelance artist illustrator that loves to create artwork that features lively characters and lush environments. Her art journey started from a young age, which eventually led her to pursue illustration in college and get her BFA. Since then, she has been creating illustrations for products, promotions, and collaborations, as well as traveling to shows all around the US to share her art in person. So with that, I will leave you with Syertse and her presentation, Creating Anime Girls in Clip Studio Paint. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Let me just. Okay. Can see, right?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mario. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for taking the time to come to this webinar. I'm really excited to do it. We have a lot to go over, and I'm hoping to get through as much as possible because we only have about an hour. So here are the 4 different things that we're gonna kind of be focusing on today, and we're gonna go through these in order, starting with the fundamentals, specifically about drawing anime girls. So not necessarily the fundamentals of drawing, but more so we're gonna hone in and really focus on anime girls in particular. Then we'll transition to expressions, and we'll kind of lean in towards the expressions of the face, but also kind of a little bit of body language. So shoulders, hands, stuff like that as well. Then we'll transition to values and color. We'll discuss that a little bit more. And then lastly, we're going to touch on mood, how there's different moods in drawings and how we can change them using value, lighting, and color. Okie dokie. So let's get started. And before I even jump into anything, I want to ask you guys to do something for me really fast. I just want you to imagine an anime girl in your head right now. Just whoever pops into mind, think of them. And I would say that for the majority of us, we're going to have a lot of different answers, right? There's so many different types of anime girls, right? So here's 3 that popped into my head when I was thinking about this. And I bring this up in the beginning because there's such a large variety of anime girls and so many different distinct styles inside this already stylized version of drawing, which is anime, right? So we have Mao Mao, Chi, and Freerun, and all 3 of these, you can tell they have a lot of similarities, but at the same time, they have quite a lot of differences, even in the specifics of maybe how big the eyes are and how they're framed on the face, or even how many heads tall they are, right? So, for example, maybe Chi is a little bit taller, maybe it's just because she's pointed, whereas Freerun is a little bit shorter. You can see her head is quite big compared to her body. So I bring that up mostly for the reason of when you're watching this webinar, I hope that you can use it in a way to kind of emphasize your own personal style and use all of these kind of techniques and tips and like push them in your own artwork in whichever way you want to go, if that makes sense. Because the way that I draw is has a specific style, right? Um, but what I want to do is kind of help you guys further your own expression and style. Okay, yeah. So this is my character, Val. I made her specifically for you guys for this webinar. She is a vampire. So I drew her and she's a little sketchy. I've been using the charcoal pencil lately for that, but I think she's pretty cute. And I just wanted to go over some of the specifics of this character and why I chose some things. And then we'll go over specifics like how many heads tall she is and proportions and stuff like that. So really quickly, based on the design, this is Valentine, and I really like having designs that are kind of quirky, right? So some things may not fully make sense. For example, these like little what are they, like twin tail covers? I think they're really cute. They kind of look like ears almost, but they're not. But I imagine she has these like different sections for like leather, and then she has a little cape that she puts on if it's sunny out, and I imagine she wears these gloves because she doesn't want to touch garlic by accident and stuff like that. So I thought she was pretty cute, and we'll kind of be using her throughout the webinar to show off a few different things. So let's start with the proportions. I made this pretty quick for you guys to just be able to see, but you can see she's about 6.5 heads tall. And give me just one moment. I'm gonna bring up one more layer to be able to mark on it. There we go. And I bring this up because this is like the technical, general anime height for an anime girl. And by no means is this a rule, but it's more so like, what's the right terminology? Like, her head is bigger than the rest of her body, but it doesn't necessarily mean that her body is small. It just means her proportions are different, right? And in a moment, I'll show it compared to a real person. This is just a sketch. We can see they're 7 heads tall. And in all honesty, it's not a huge difference, right? Like if you look, it's not a huge difference, but you'll see more specifics of like, this is where her legs start, but this is where regular humans like start. So you see, and we have this kind of like stylizations where they're extreme in some areas and then kind of honed down in others, right? And really quickly, I just want to show this. This is like 6.5, 7. I bring this up because sometimes it's hard to see like how many heads tall things are because of perspective, right? So, for example, we saw her from the top and she's looking like this. Here's her shoulders, this is her feet. Obviously, you can't tell that she's 6 heads tall here. So, I don't want anyone to be like, oh, every time I draw a character, I have to make sure they're 6 heads tall. It's more of like just a general idea of how you feel about it. And then moving on, we have another one here. Just hide these silly things. And that's more about like body proportions and how they are in relation to each other, if that makes sense, right? So we all kind of know that anime heads are usually pretty big, right? Kind of like a bobblehead look. Depending on how extreme you want it, you can make it that. Sometimes they have these huge heads and then these like stick thin, necks. And it's kind of fun, how extreme you can be. That's what's fun about animes. You can kind of tone it down and be a little bit more realistic, or you can really push it and then suddenly, they have all these like crazy shapes and everything in between. So I think that's really fun. And I brought up these lines here too, just because I want to show how I decided to frame the body in this instance, which is like we have the chest area here, then it kind of falls into the waist here, and you can see that's smaller. And then at the furthest point of the hips, it's actually further out than the chest. And this is kind of on purpose. I do like this kind of pear-shaped almost body type, and I did that on purpose. And you can see how we kind of go out in, and even the thighs are just like these soft kind of curves like this, not super jagged, but they're showing the muscle and the fat on the body and how it kind of gets smaller as it goes down. So the thighs are a little bit thicker than the calves, and then we move on to the feet and the ankles down here. They're being covered by the boots. But you can see how we have this like soft lines, and that's kind of what I like to use for my girl characters. Is I'm not using many harsh lines. It's more just a lot of these soft curves to show the form. And this is the same thing with the neck and the shoulders, where we have quite a thin neck. I do like to draw thin necks, and usually I make my necks pretty short as well. But I believe that's because my characters are usually pretty cute. I would say she's kind of like in a cute archetype. But also like these soft sloped shoulders. And I know the jacket's covering it, but here's how it'd be, right? Generally. Oh, sorry, the arm goes this way. But you can see how they're like kind of sloped down. They're not super harsh, and by no means do you not, if you want to have harsh shoulders, you can more dramatic. But in terms of this character in particular, we have a lot of softness here. And one last thing that I want to point out in terms of proportions and how they're referencing each other is just how wide her head is. Right? Look at how wide her head is compared to her shoulders. Usually, like you kind of want your shoulders to be a little bigger, but they're taking up the majority of her, torso here. You can see it's pretty wide, and then we have like about half a head maybe on each side. So all these proportions all together seem kind of like harmonious in a way, right? And that's kind of what I wanted to show with these two things. Then we're going to quickly zoom in on the head in particular, because I know face and head proportions are definitely of interest. So let me just add another layer. Okay. So we already talked about like kind of the thin neck and the sloped shoulders, but here you can clearly see how big this whole head is, and how it actually extends further out than the chin, especially in this regard. And then the hair on top of that goes even more, right? Because it's another layer on top. So you can see just how extreme it is, and where her eyes are placed on the head when you draw it like that, her face right here. There's all the space for activity, right? So this is where we draw our bangs, or, what are these called? A lot of anime girls have them, these like kind of, and then they have the bangs. So there's so much activity here. But, I think when you look at a character like this, you may not recognize just how much head they have until you break it down here. And maybe you've seen like 3D models or bases, and you kind of notice that's the case. But they're quite big, and ears are usually pretty small unless you want to really make them kind of like poked out, which is pretty cute too, So you have some flexibility with this, of course, but for a cute character like this, I do think this works quite well. Um, and because we talked about these things, and I have a style, I want to show you guys another example of the same exact character, but in a slightly different way. So here I have, oh, wait, 1 second. Here's a few little things. I'll let you guys look at that really quick. Maybe for the video, you guys can pause, but here's some notes. But here's a comparison, right? So I quickly drew a second version. And all of the designs are the same. We have the same jacket, the same outfit, the same hair. Everything's the same except for the proportions, right? And the tiny little intricacies of her face. So now her face is a little bit slimmer, it's a little bit longer, and it's also her head is a little bit smaller compared to her body. So she now has a slightly older look, right? Her eyes are a little bit slimmer, and they're kind of like less wide open, right? So she looks a little bit more mature like that as well. Her body proportions here, once again. Now her chest and her body and her thighs are a little bit different. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference here. And I actually made her torso longer as well, and her legs longer. I know it's a little bit harder to see, but her torso is a bit longer. And I actually drew her shirt kind of shorter on her, because I imagined that if they're wearing the same exact clothes, for her, it would cover her whole torso, whereas for her, it would be a little bit short. So now you can see her belly button, right? And the way that her shorts fit on her is slightly different as well. And you can see how even the legs are just ever so slightly slimmer, but they still have these curves, right? You can see that they're still following curves, just slimmer, And so this is why I bring it up to show that there's different ways to use these decisions, right? We're still following the same basic patterns, but we're creating different characters as a result of that. Still soft slope shoulders, but maybe they're a little bit more further out, a little bit top heavy. And then you have a slightly different character. Let me just double check. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is Val. Let's move on to the expressions of Val, shall we? So, expressions are something that are really fun. I'm sure you guys love drawing different kinds of expressions. Whether that's happy, sad, mad, whatever. What's fun about expressions is they can be both loud and kind of extreme, but also subtle as well. And for me, I kind of lean towards like a middle ground, almost to the subtle. And I'll point out the subtle expressions after. For me, these are a little bit more loud. So here I have a little drawing of Mau Mau that I did, and a little crying girl that I just doodled recently. I thought they were good examples of expressions. But I just want to point out a few things in both of these and explain kind of how I evoke the expressions that I'm trying to get out of these, if that makes sense. Like more specifics. Because we have Mau Mau here, and she's surprised. I hope that, when you look at this image, you think, oh, she's a little bit shocked or surprised, right? And obviously, one big telltale sign of that is how open and wide her eyes are, right? Like they're quite up right here. And we have the eyebrows up as well. They're pretty high up. And they're almost like out, a little like, casual. Like if they were here, for example, you could see she looks a little bit more aggressive. But for here, it's almost like a pleasant shock, right? She has these like um, blush on her face, right? So it shows that it's shock, but it's not necessarily bad. It's more like maybe she's saw a plant that she really liked in the distance and she's happy about it, right? Another thing I wanted to point out really fast is with the eyes being upright, there's also this like area right here. You can see there's white here. And that's going to show that her eyes are more wide than usual, right? Because if you have this white on your eye, you usually don't see it when your eyes are um, just relaxed, right? Usually the eyelid will kind of cover it so you can see it's like that. So when the eye is bigger, your eyes widen, you see that tiny little bit of white. Suddenly, even just that tiny little sliver is going to make it more obvious that she's shocked, right? Um, Obviously, we have this kind of visual effects as well. So, think very typical angry, this kind of thing. So all of these things can be used all together to present expressions, and you can use different variables. Her shoulders may be sloped down, so she's a little bit more casual, but her hand is up here, suggesting that maybe she was in the middle of doing something, and then she turned around and was shocked. She was still holding her hand up in that moment, right? So that tells a little bit of a story. And then we'll quickly move on to this one, which is, let me see time. Okay, we're doing good. It's a tearful or like a flustered expression, right? So you can see she's got some tears in her eyes. Her mouth is open, almost like she's kind of like protesting. She has her eyebrows. One moment. Like really just kind of sad, but she has her blush too, so she's almost like embarrassed. That's why I put flustered as well. Almost like maybe her crush saw her do something embarrassing and she can't stand it. She's like, oh my gosh, how could it be? This type of thing. And I do enjoy drawing these kind of like expressions because they're kind of like pretty, right? You think of like Ghibli tears, like it's kind of like these expressions are full of emotion in a way that's like quite beautiful, and I really like that. But I wanted to do another version to show you guys how big of a difference it makes by just changing the mouth and the eyebrows. So here we have an angry version. Now it looks like her crush did something mean to her, right? Like he pushed her and she's annoyed by that. How dare you? Something like that. And obviously, something like the eyebrows and the mouth are going to make a very clear acknowledgement on what a person is feeling or what a character is feeling, right? But just how much can change and the whole narrative changes as a result, I think is very powerful. So keeping in mind where those eyebrows are placed is very important. And what I like about using eyebrows in particular and mouths is and anime in general is that you can kind of get really extreme with it if that's what you want to do, right? So sometimes you can think of like anime where, let me see, like they'll go so extreme with their emotions, right? And you'll see them sometimes they'll turn into almost caricatures of their own characters, right? But they'll become like this, right? Where the eyebrows will merge into their eyes. You see, this looks like a certain character by accident. But now you don't even see the tops of the eyes. You can sometimes see that like some characters, you'll never see the tops of their eyes. Their eyebrows and their eyes are merged together all of the time, and constantly like this angry look. Another example of that is like the mouth, right? Because I kind of lean towards a slightly more realistic style, so my mouths never do this, but a lot of anime they get really fun with it, where they go like past the face, and it's really cute, especially I feel like shoujo manga sometimes really does this like really cute, extreme. And so the blush lines come off the face, they're breaking free. That's how strong the expression is. It's breaking out of the bounds of the face. It's really fun. So it's fun how extreme you can make it. And the last thing that I want to point out is the eyes, right? Because obviously the eyes tell a lot of stories. And we already talked about how, where the eyeball is placed in the kind of eye socket, maybe is the right word, is going to tell a story. But if you go even more extreme, it can change the size of the iris, right? So sometimes they'll do this, they'll make these tiny little dots, and now it looks super shocked. Or, for example, they'll do different shapes, right? And now suddenly you can tell just what expression it's going to be right here, there's so many different ways that you can be extreme with it like that, and then we have these like, whoa. And so you can do all these extreme things, or we can lean towards subtle, which is what we're going to move on to right now. So a lot of my drawings also feature quite subtle expressions. What I mean by subtle is that it's not super in your face. When you're looking at it, but it does still evoke an emotion, right? So, for example, I hope that when you look at this image, you would see it as confident, right? I would think that her posture maybe is confident, and the way that she's looking over and her eyebrows are raised is quite confident. But I just want to point out how, even though at first glance she is just, smiling, she's just a person smiling, how the different body movements and her facial expression kind of evoke an idea of confidence. So we can go from the larger elements, which is her body posture and the way that things are framed. And I bring up asymmetry because there's a lot of that in her posture and the way that she's standing, right? She doesn't have a lot of asymmetry in her design naturally, right? So even these, what are they? Suspenders are usually kind of over the top. So she has a lot of symmetry in her design. So I make up for that by making the drawing kind of asymmetrical. So you can see how, let's just slower. I want you guys to be able to see. Yeah, you can kind of see that. You can see how her shoulders are, so diagonal, right? And then by comparison, our hips are kind of the other way. So now we already have this kind of difference. And same with the arm. This arm, pretty straight, going down. This one, like that, right? So we have this asymmetry here. She's even her body, right? Her torso right here, kind of leaning towards this way, right? I kind of have to draw an arrow in 3D to make it clear. But her face is turning this way, right? So we have so much asymmetry here. Her body's kind of contorted. But I would say that her shoulders are back, right? You can see her arms are behind her body here. So since her shoulders are back, it shows that she's not hunched over. It shows a little bit of confidence, right? She has nothing to hide, so she has her shoulders back and her arms back, and she's showing her body and kind of leaning onto her legs, so it shows that she's comfortable, you know? And then her face specifically, you know, it's just a smile, first glance, but her eyebrows are pretty high up, right? Like this. They're not, you know, tense. They're not too like apologetic, right? Where she could come off as a little bit more meek, right? If she had her eyebrows like this. But she has a, you know, confident expression. And the other thing that I want to point out that I think is important with subtlety is that her face isn't perfectly symmetrical either, even though it's, I would say it's relatively from the front, right? Her mouth is ever so slightly lifted on this side right here. So it almost gives off the impression of a smirk, right? Just a tiny little smirk. And let me flip this so maybe you can see. Do you see how just a tiny bit of a lift here? You know, and it's really small. I don't necessarily think it's something that you notice immediately when you look at the image, but it does change the impression that you get of her. She's smirking slightly to the side. She's leaning, her shoulders are back. So all of these tiny things together are ways in which she kind of looks confident. I hope that's what it presents, you know. And that's kind of something that I wanted to bring up because you don't necessarily have to be super loud with every single thing. You know, if somebody's angry, they don't have to be like fists in the air, you know, faces red if it doesn't fit the narrative, right? It could be a subtle anger or like a frustration or, you know, other forms of anger, I guess. But it's fun because subtlety it allows you to be um, more refined with the expressions, and I feel like I bring this one up because I feel like it's kind of the end all be all of subtlety of my recent works because it's so minute. And I wonder if you guys can kind of notice what I mean by the face based off of the previous one that I drew. And that is that there's just ever so slightly a difference between these two eyes and how the mouth flips up, right? And like, I would argue that when you're looking at this, you don't necessarily think that, right? It's more of a feeling when you're looking at it. You're like, oh, you know, she's a little bit like, what would you even call this expression? For me, it almost looks like she's confident again, just like a little bit snarky, right? If you watch Freerun, there's times where she's, you know, fighting demons and she's acting a certain way. And that's what I envision when I'm doing this. And I really wanted to keep it subtle. It wasn't something that I wanted to bring to the forefront of this drawing. So I really just kept it really subtle, but I wanted to enunciate it here, and I wonder if you can see it. There's just a tiny bit of shadow right here. I know it's like super, super light, but you can see how there's a difference between the tones I'm color picking right now, and it's just a tiny bit of shadow underneath that's kind of showing that her eyelid is lifted up just a little bit more. Whereas this one is a little less. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. Um, so it's kind of lifted up right there. And because of that, also, or maybe because of this, her mouth is lifting to one side right here. You can see she's got a little push on this side. This one's a little flat. And I imagine, like, you know, when you scrunch up your mouth a little bit on one side, your cheek is gonna push up, and so your eyelid's gonna push up. And that's kind of what I imagined when I drew this scene. And I feel like it's really subtle, but I'd argue that having this adds a visual interest to the drawing that maybe you don't notice at first glance, but that is important when you're looking at the full image, right? So having these tiny little things, and that's why I bring up also that I bring that also up because drawing symmetry, right, with the symmetrical ruler, really fun, right? It's awesome how you can draw perfectly from side to side. Oh, mirror image, when you're drawing someone forefront, it's great. But I urge you guys, when you're using this, if you are, right, maybe draw the sketch with symmetry. And then you go over the line work and you don't use the symmetry tool, right? And even just not using the symmetry tool is going to give you an ever so slightly like human variance, right, from each side, and that's going to look almost better, right? Because it's natural, and humans and characters are not perfectly symmetrical. So when you're doing this, just what is it called? Add a little wabi sabi. I think it would look nice. I think it works. Um, so yeah, and the last thing that I'll show before I do some like live demo drawing. Let me see time. Okay, 32. Oh, so fast. Is expressions here. So when I do expressions, or I like to practice expressions, I sometimes use photos of my friends, and I'll brush through this really quickly, but I think it's a great way to kind of create expressions in a way where it feels natural, right? I think sometimes we look on images on Pinterest and they all have these perfectly pretty faces, but using real life photos is what really like brings it to life. Okay, let's move on to values. So values we have, one moment, sorry. Oh no, not values, I'm sorry, expressions, there we go. Let me quickly draw for you guys an expression of Valerie. I'm just going to use the charcoal brush here. And I created a base because I wasn't sure how much time we had. So I'm glad I have it here so I can just show you guys. And we have this kind of 3/4 view. I can do a lot of different expressions on her. I would say like, maybe I can do something different, right? She's looking away this time. Her eyebrows are kind of flat, right? So I would say maybe she looks kind of annoyed. Maybe we can kind of lean into that, right? Where like she's looking away. Maybe you said something that irked her a little bit. She doesn't want to show it, but you can tell. We put her lip kind of further forward, right? So she's looking over. She's like, oh, whatever. I guess. I guess we can do that. I guess we can go there. Kind of like that. Um, I'm not sure if I can draw another expression for you guys. Maybe we can do that after. I just want to make sure that we kind of go over value and color properly. So maybe we'll come back to this if we have the time. Yes. Give me one moment. Okay. So value and color, yes. So let's start with value specifically. And value is right the different hold on a second. Which pen do I want? This one. Okay. And what I mean by values is the darks and the lights, essentially, right? It's the most bare bones explanation, but that's what it is. So the shadows here, and I bring this image up in particular because I think it's a good example of lumping in values in a way where it's like large sections, right? Because you can see here, like, look how much of her is in shadow. Like all of this, right? Excluding this, I guess, is in shadow. We have these big lumps of her hair and her neck. And I bring this up because I think a common issue that people may start out with is working on their values or their shading in tiny little pieces, right? So instead of looking at a big picture, they'll maybe start just shading each finger individually. When in reality, I would say that the best way to approach placing values on a character is to start from big to small, right? Okay, so here is an example, so maybe you can see it clearer. How much shadows and then light there is, and I hope you guys can tell that This is essentially where the light is coming from. Although, I mean, it's not realistic. If we're being honest, it's not a realistic, shadow. It's more so like a suggestion, and then what looks cool, right? Because anime is so like stylized already that we can stylize our shadows as well. I wanted her eye to be slightly in the light here, and I wanted this to be, slightly sideways. And I wanted her hat to have a rim because otherwise I felt like it fell too far into the background, So it's this like kind of fake reality where it's still kind of believable that I think is important. But I hope you guys can see how the values are grouped here. And you can see the darkest area is actually the background and the eyes, right? And the background is framing her. And then we have the light here, the brightest part being the star here, and maybe her shirt. And then you can see how her skin is the secondary lightest, I would say, right here. And then we have the shadows as well. So we have that grouping. And I would say that even from a distance, right? Look how tiny it is. I would say that you can still see what's going on, right? And I bring that up because it's definitely a choice, right? Because there's different artists or different ways of drawing where you can use mostly light tones and then the darks will show, or you'll use mostly darks and then the lights will show. And why I bring that up is because I would like it to be a conscious decision, right? So if you're shading in all grays and lights, think about how using a dark element can actually bring your eye towards it. So for example, here we have the eyes. This right here is the darkest point. And that's not by accident. Her face is the part that I want you to look at the most. So her eyes are going to be the darkest, right? For here, it's a little bit harder to tell, right? Because the background is pure black. It's really dark. I usually don't use this darkness, but this is the darkest image I had. But I would say that from a distance, the things that you can see the most are her skin, right here, and the flowers. And I think that's a good way to visualize it because you can kind of see the character, right, and her position. And then you can see the elements around her slowly. So first, maybe you'll see the flowers and then you'll see the details and kind of go more and more and more and more, right? So it's kind of all intentional, which I think is important, is to consider those aspects when you're drawing a character or an illustration. So now we have Val again. And we have a cute little drawing of her. She's got this kind of like raw expression. I don't know, a little bit teasing, a little silly. I thought it was cute. 39, yes. I'm just gonna add some shading. Here's the gradient version, right? So you can see how big of a difference that made. Is just adding subtle gradients to the edges. And I'm just gonna be using a clipping mask to add some like really rough shading. But I could do it really dark too. Right now I'm using a multiply layer just so I can see the lines underneath. But maybe let's see. Let's say like the light source is coming from over here and the side is in shadow. I'm gonna start by like being super loud with it. Like we're going from big to small, right? So we're getting these big sections in first, and then we can kind of carve out the light from there, right? So I use this dark color so that you can visually see better, but also sometimes it's better to kind of go dark and then pull the light out from it, right? Let's see. Every time I draw with like a super dark shadow like this, I always imagine they're like at a campfire. I feel like campfire like lighting scenarios are always super extreme, harsh darks and very light lights. And I'm just using the G pen for this, like a really easy way to fill in color flatly. First, I'm gonna go in. And like as I'm adding the shadow, I'm kind of imagining like what is in the way to create that shadow, if that makes sense. Oh gosh, it's gonna be real extreme with the dark. But I'm also like not doing it out of necessity, right? Because like if there's something that would technically be there but it doesn't look good, I'm not gonna add it. versus something that may not necessarily be there. You know, like it's not completely breaking the rules of where the shadows would be, but it looks better there, then I'll add it. You know, that's what's kind of fun about drawing an anime is that you don't have to stick to the rules exactly. If you're close, then it looks good, then everyone's happy. And you know, stylization is all about pushing extremes, whether it's lighting or composition or perspective, anatomy. It's like, what do you want to push? How far do you want to push it? So many different options, and your decisions on those options is what kind of is going to create your style. Just big old shadows. And I kind of usually flip back and forth pretty often when I'm either sketching or drawing fully. 42, cool. So we have this pretty harsh shadow, right? Let's just lock this layer here, and I'm going to change the color of it ever so slightly. I like to shade with blue. That's probably way too saturated. Okay, there we go. Shade with blue, and then we can kind of use a lighter blue on the edges, right? Not as saturated. Or in areas where I feel like the light would bounce off of it a little bit better, right? And then after we get through this, gotta be a little bit more careful with lighter tones, right? We don't want them to be as harsh because they wouldn't be as harsh. So I'm just gonna lighten them up just a tad bit too. And the last thing we'll do is we'll actually find this layer right here. And this is a skin layer. And I'm just gonna use it as a guideline for changing this because kind of I want to be careful with shading skin in particular because even though the shadows are cool, it's kind of hard to make cool shadows on skin work well because it usually makes the skin look a little dead, which funnily enough, she's a vampire, so maybe that would work for her, but that's not my goal right now. So I usually always just warm up the skin ever so slightly, and you can still see I'm using blue here. I'm kind of like brushing it to become a purple, but it's not as blue as her skin. And now we have some shading. And then lastly, what I'm gonna do is gonna merge this all together. Let's just make this all one layer or one folder, duplicate the folder, merge selected layer. Now it's all one flat. And why we're doing that is because I want to show you guys how to use gradient maps. And let's just duplicate it. I love duplicating things and then so I can move back to it. So gradient maps are really fun, and I have some presets that I got from the Clip Studio Asset Store. Look at how crazy these are. They're so fun. But here's some subtle ones as well. And basically what they do is they shift your values in different ways. So now you can see like the brightest brights are going to be like this color. For example, if I wanted it to be white, then I push it towards that, right? I hope that makes sense. It's kind of like some are funny and like weird and confusing, but the way that I like to use them sometimes is, for example, like this, right? This looks completely different. It looks like maybe she's in like sleepier tone or something. But what I like to do sometimes, if I want to lean it towards a certain way, I'll do that and I'll just make it lower, right? And I feel like even just that, it's a different vibe, right? Like it's a little softer. I really like these colors and the way that they influence each other. So maybe we have that as one vibe. Let's move that over here. Let's make it a little smaller because I'm gonna have a few of these, right? And then let's do this one. Like more dramatic, right? And let's play with values with this one too. So right here we have the level correction. And this is the lights, this is the mediums, and this is the darks, right? So let's push the darks, right? So the midtones right now are right here. Let's push them. Look how dark that is. And then push the darks as well. And then I can push the lights here. Now we have a much more extreme version. Let's duplicate that. Use a gradient map. Which one? maybe it's like a cool tone. Um, I just mess around with like different different lightings, and I usually don't leave it at 100%, but yeah, something like that. I don't know. Just a more extreme version, right? This looks kind of like maybe in an anime, it's like inside, and I don't know. I don't know how to explain it other than this looks more pastel and this looks more graphic. But you can tell that these two different images, based on the lighting and the colors, invokes a different emotion, right, and a different style, and that's what's fun about it. And we don't have as much time, so we can't get into detail. But even things like the line art color, right? You see, the line art is not black color, but even the darkest element, where is it here? You can see it's like a dark brown, right? Whereas here, we're getting to pitch black. And that's going to make a huge difference, in the vibe and in the softness. And you can be more extreme with it after with, things like glow dodge. Really fun, but really easy to overuse. So usually when I suggest these things, I suggest them in like a less is more type of way. Don't use it at 100% kind of vibe, just little by little. And yeah, really quickly, I want to bring this up so you guys can see it. A second. There you go, so you guys can read. Just some of the tips that I went over, maybe a few that I haven't. Let me just go over that. From small. Oh, hard and soft edges. Yeah, that's something that I didn't have time to bring up. I can just point out really fast. One moment. This is a good example right here. Hard and soft edges. Mostly for drawing, you can see how it's like harsh and it'll slowly blend out into the soft area. And that's what, like, this variance is what creates a dynamic look, right? Same with here, we got sharp and then slowly it devolves into soft. And right here for the face, it's all soft, right? Because I didn't want it to be so harsh on her face, even though it could be, But this variance of hard and soft is what, makes it look kind of interesting. Hmm. Group your values, consider your light source and color, right? So, I shade in blue and my highlights are usually yellow. But that doesn't have to be the case. Your highlights can be blue if you're like in drawn or something like that. So it just depends. Make conscious decisions about it. Yeah, make conscious decisions to group your light, medium, and dark values, and consider how your values affect where the eye is drawn in the image. So that was when I put up the two images of the dark and the light, and where your eye kind of travels to when you're glancing at it. Yep. Let's just make all three of these all together. lots of different Valeries. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got for today. That's okay, Mario?
It's super okay, Sasha. It's been amazing. I know it's really packed in just like around 45 minutes,
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
did it
I feel like I'm talking
wonderfully.
so fast.
No, but people loved it. There's a lot of love from people. You will see stories. We asked at the beginning from which part of the world were people watching us today. So there's a lot
Oh,
of people from the US. I saw
awesome.
some interesting countries. I saw Trinidad and Tobago, Hungary,
Wow,
Greece,
awesome.
Mexico, Ukraine,
Cool.
Belgium, Africa, UK, Costa Rica, Germany, etc., etc. So thank all of you who are watching us live. And
Thank
there are a
you.
lot of questions. So let me
Okay.
start with one of them.
Mhm.
There's a lot, but let me check. This one is from Inkira Studio. What's the most useful tool in Cliff to Paint to you, or the tool you use the most?
What are the tools I use the most? Can I give you like a few? Like
For sure.
yeah. Let me give you like three, and I won't go into the brush tool. Obviously, I use the brush tool. I would say that symmetry tools are actually really useful for me, or any of the what is this called? rulers, all of the rulers. So the symmetry ruler, I showed it off already. You're showing it kind of side by side. But also there's a perspective ruler that's really cool that I use a lot, you know. So if I want to draw stuff in perspective, buildings and stuff like that, I can use this to kind of create that. Lasso tools and stuff like that are incredibly useful. One second, let me delete this layer. Yeah, lasso tool and any of the like selection tools I use a whole lot, and the liquify tool. Oh my gosh, I use this a ton. This is like one of the things that I use actually in my sketches. When I sketch, I'll actually like adjust things with the liquify tool. You know, maybe her forehead's too big, she looks a little angry. This is probably like a huge one for me. But if you look right here, this is my most used tool section in general. Like there's more tools than this, but this is what I use the most right here. I hope that makes sense. Just a lot of things for like quality of life, right? All right, fix your face.
Yes. This one is from Garrett Murray.
Mhm.
How do you practice new poses and how far you go with them? Just sketch, line art, flat colors?
For poses, I like to practice from photos. I kind of showed this already a little bit with the photos that I had from my friends. But I also find references online and also from other artists as well. You know, sometimes they have these like crazy poses and I'll just try to mimic them and understand why they chose it. But I think for me in terms of poses, I keep it to a sketch. I don't think there's any necessarily good reason for me to go to a full finish because the sketch is there to kind of for me to understand where the body is at and where it's placed. So just doing a bunch of them in different ways, I think, just hones out your like visual library pretty well, if that makes sense.
Hmm. And this one is from Eduardo Dominguez. Anime girls' hair is very diverse and it comes in many lengths. Any
Yes.
tips to avoid making it look stiff?
Stiff. I think one good tip that I think I use all the time without even realizing it is that when I draw anime girls, I already draw them with the idea that there's like air flowing around them, if that makes sense. Like, even here, you can see that, like, her ponytails, they're moving kind of to the side, right? And this is kind of flowing this way here. And, you know, I could easily draw it in a way where it's all going down. Like, it's all one section, it's all going down like this. But I always, the back of my head, I'm like, oh, a slight breeze is moving through her hair. And just the idea of that creates a kind of wispiness and a softness. And you know, you can be a little bit more extreme with it or you can be subtle with it. But I think even just considering that to be an element can really make all of the different hair strands kind of move in a flowy, nice, pretty way.
Mhm. And this one is from Faraji. Are there any anime that has influenced you as an artist?
Oh gosh, so many. Um, the number one anime that I think of is Tokyo Mew Mew, or Mew Mew Power when I saw it on 4Kids TV, and that was like my first introduction to anime. It played at like 6 or 7 a.m. on like Sunday mornings, and I would wake up and I would rush downstairs and I would spend that 30 minutes with a little notebook trying to copy them because like I didn't have a computer or anything, you know, I couldn't look at still images, so I would just try to copy it as it moved. And that was like huge to me. I thought they were so cute and so pretty. And then from there I kind of saw more. So like Spirited Away is the first Studio Ghibli film that I watched, and I was just really just taken aback by how beautiful it was. And I think ever since then I was like really deeply like engrossed in this media.
Thank you for sharing that. And this one goes from Isabella Bucchi. What size of canvas or DPI do you use regularly?
This is a good one because I feel like uh I create prints, right? So I try to work in the size of the print. So here it's 17 by 12. It's pretty big. Um my prints are usually 11 by 17. So what I'll do is I'll have 11 inches by 17. And then this 0.25 is actually the bleed room. So the little outside edge here, that's a little bit extra, that's going to be cut off in the printing process. And then resolution is 300. I see sometimes people do 350 as well. In pixels, I can share that here. Height is 5,000, 3,000 generally. It depends. If I'm just doodling something, it won't be this big, right? For a finished illustration, it could be this or even bigger sometimes if I feel like I might be wanting to size it up, right? So I think it does depend on what it needs to be, and what your computer can handle. Please be careful, don't explode your computer for a high res image.
Unfortunately, the pop-up window wasn't
Oh, it
showing,
didn't
but
show. I'm sorry.
you mentioned 300.
Oh,
It's a
yes.
good
Let me write
DPI
it.
average, right?
Yes, 11 by 17, and then it's like 11.25 with a bleed. 17.25 resolution, 300. And then, sorry, let me double check anything else. In pixels, like 5,000, oops, 5,000 by like 3,000 ish. You know, Generally around this area, a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on what you need.
Thank you. And this is an interesting question from McLaren Rogerson. How do you tackle distinguishing different aged characters in your style? Are there different proportions and techniques you use? For example, child versus teen versus adult characters?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that like in terms of different characters, I saw this once and I think it stuck with me. Um, at least for anime styles, like how many lines are on the face of a character kind of ages them a lot. So for example, like here I would say that she's quite young, right? And the more lines we add, like the kind of older she is. And also I would say that the proportions of the face in general, right? I would say that it's kind of funny, but I would say that the more extreme anime it looks, like eyes are down here and big, right? The chin is like almost non-existent, leaning towards TV. That looks like a kid, right? But if you're leaning slightly more towards like a realistic person, obviously this is not a realistic person anyway, but like we have a little bit smaller set eyes, that are more in a location that's normal. We have a longer face, a shorter like head area. That's starting to look a little bit more like an adult. And you can kind of play with that. Obviously, you can add wrinkles and facial hair and stuff like that as well. But generally, you kind of want to have a bigger head and big eyes for small characters or young characters, and vice versa.
hmm And this one is from Jack Irvin. What were some common mistakes, tendencies you made when first learning to draw this style of character?
Hmm, that's a good question. I feel like I had, I feel like had like so many different like phases of things. Let me see if I can pull something up really fast. One moment. I have like some old drawings, like really really old. I think this is a good example. This one is quite old. Oh, that's not right. 1 second. Oh, it's so tiny. I don't know when I drew this, but it was a really long time ago. So we have like quite a few issues here, right? I think one of the biggest issues with this drawing in particular is actually the values. They're so muddy. Like there's hardly any darks. Like the dark is here. This is the darkest dark. It would be like right here. Um, but then like the lights, yeah, it's white, but there's not a lot, and you can't tell the hair from the background. Look at how close the background is to the hair, like it's blending in with itself, alongside obviously some quite a few anatomy issues and things like that. And for example, like kind of just overdoing this thing and the shadows. And if I mentioned it before, I brought up like using large to small. This is kind of a good example of it because like I can fix this right now, right? Like all of these lines are tiny. Let's just make them less, right? For example, just brush out some of it. We don't need it there. Simplify it, right? And then add some shapes to it. And you can kind of see how things make a tiny bit more sense as a result. Some things can't be saved, but I think learning those things, it just takes time. And visually you may not even realize it at the time, right? You just think that you're drawing folds and there's tons of folds everywhere, so that's how it looks. But that's not necessarily the truth, and looking at references is going to make it more obvious that that's not necessarily the case, because how you see it in your mind isn't necessarily how it looks or even looks good, right? Hope that makes sense.
Yep, totally. And unfortunately, our time is limited.
Yeah, yeah.
But we will go in one last question from Yevon. Hello from Ukraine's Syertse. Thank you so much for the webinar. Before the webinar, I researched your work and I must say that it is incredible. I can
Thank
see a
you.
lot of effort and love that you put into your works.
Oh.
If you had an opportunity to give an advice to us beginners or middle skilled artists or to yourself in the past, what would you recommend? Maybe there's something else worth paying attention or something that was not mentioned in the webinar?
Hmm. What would I say? Hmm. Okay, so two different things. Let's go with one more technical and one more like mental, right? So technical, I think that this is an issue that I noticed with beginner artists, but also something that I did myself, and that's making decisions for drawings and coloring and values based off of what you think is right. And I don't know if that makes sense, but like what I mean by that is like when you draw a character, right? Sorry, one moment. You draw a character and you draw them and then you start shading, right? I like I think it's easy to be like, oh, well, there's a shadow underneath the neck. And there's a shadow underneath, the bangs of the hair. And there's a shadow inside the ears. And you're working without thinking essentially. You're like, oh, well, there's obviously something here. This is where the shadow is. And for the majority of the time, that is true, right, to some degree. But I think working consciously and what is the other word? I use thoughtfully somewhere. Yeah. Consciously and thoughtfully, I think is actually more important than I realized, right? Because like there's no one right way to do things. And the more you work on things consciously, whether it's drawing, whether it's values, whether it's coloring, the more you'll understand why you're making those choices and why some things work and some things don't. So making those conscious decisions, I think, is a huge difference, or makes a huge difference in the long run and in the short term. And mentally, I would say like, uh, don't limit yourself to only drawing the things that you like to draw. However, don't expand so far that you're learning something that you're not even interested in. I think it's there's a good medium in being like well versed in your general realm of artwork, right? So not somebody that only draws one thing all the time and that's it, unless that's really what you want to do, but in a general sense, right? So when if you're interested in drawing characters, you don't have to learn how to draw monster trucks. You know what I mean? Unless it's something you're interested in, and vice versa. But also, like if you're like drawing anime girls, draw different styles of anime girls, draw different styles of anime boys, put them in a scene. Things that are relevant to what you're interested in, and you'll see your world kind of expand as a result.
Well, thank you so much for these wise words and
Thank
also your
you.
time doing this amazing webinar. People are sending a lot of love through the chat. Thanks for a great
Thank you.
webinar,
I wish I could see the chat. I
Colin.
don't think I can see it, but thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I can share it later. Daphne, thanks so much. Sergi, Michael, Jonathan, love your portfolio. Thank you for the
Thank you
webinar.
so
It's been
much,
very fun and
everyone. Thank you so much
informative.
for
But
being
not.
here.
So with that, Anastasia, thank you all of you. And before we go, let me just share one last bit of information. Many of you asked if this webinar was being recorded. Yes. Let me share my screen here. There you go. And yes, it's been recorded and we'll upload it to our Graphicsly channel. Also, you can check Clip Studio Paint channel for tips and many other features of Clip Studio Paint. So subscribe to those two channels. And if you want to learn more about Clip Studio, don't forget to check our website, clipstudio.net/n, and also graphicsly.com. And to follow the project Syertse, has been doing lately. And check her Instagram, Twitch, X, or Twitter, and her website, syertse.com. So with that, thank you so much, Sasha, for this amazing
Thank
webinar.
you.
Thank all of you who watch us live and also who are watching the recordings. So please stay tuned with Graphically and Clip Studio in our social media for future webinars and promotions, tips, and anything else related to Clip Studio. So we hope to see you next time. Stay tuned. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Sacha. Bye bye.